What would you do if your own family told you that you ruined Christmas right after you saved your grandson's life? How did a simple walk to the kitchen turn into a call to emergency services, and then into my exile from my son's home? This is how they pushed me out, and how I answered them using the only language they respect: paper and procedure. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Gerald, I am 63, and that Christmas I went to my son's house telling myself I was only a guest. I tried to leave my pride at home with my old work boots and my worn jacket. I had polished shoes on my feet, a clean shirt under my coat, and a simple cake box in my hands. I told myself that this was their house, their holiday, their rules. I would smile, eat, and not get in the way. The street was full of cars when I arrived. Lucas and Kara had moved to a new neighborhood that year, the kind of place with perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. Light from their big front window spilled onto the snow. I could see silhouettes moving inside, people holding glasses, people laughing. When I stepped out of my small car, I felt the usual mix of warmth and distance. I was happy to see my grandson, but I also knew where I stood in that picture. Kara opened the door before I could knock. She looked past the cake box first, checking the hallway, then smiled at me. It was the careful kind of smile, the one people use when they are still thinking about other things. She thanked me for coming and reached for the dessert. She said in a light tone that I did not have to bring anything because her parents had everything under control. She walked it straight toward the kitchen without even looking inside the box. I stepped into the hallway and saw coats, expensive ones, hanging on the rack. From the dining room, I heard Roland's loud voice telling a story and drawing laughter. I could also hear the soft chime of phones. Someone was recording or taking pictures. I hung up my old coat and tried to smooth my hair with my hand. Then I heard a small pair of feet and felt something hit my leg. Toby ran in and wrapped his arms around my knees. That simple touch made the whole trip worth it. Lucas came after him. He patted my shoulder and thanked me for coming, said he knew it was a long drive. He looked tired, but there was a brightness in his eyes when he looked toward the dining room. He said that Kara's parents had gone all out that year, that they wanted things to be special, that everything was just perfect. I nodded and said that it looked very nice. I reminded him quietly to check that the food for Toby was safe. He gave a quick nod, the kind you give when you want a subject to end. The dining room looked like a picture from a magazine. Long table, thick runner, candles, little name cards at each plate. There were 2 large chairs at the head and foot of the table. Roland sat at one end with a glass in his hand, telling a story about a deal he had made that year. Elaine sat near him, laughing on cue. Lucas and Kara had mid-table seats, and my place card was near the far corner, between a cousin of Kara's and a friend of Roland's. I noticed that my seat was close to the kitchen door, almost like I was part of the serving line. When I sat down, Roland looked down the table, raised his glass, and greeted me. He did it in a joking way, saying that the safety officer had arrived, so everyone had better chew carefully. People laughed. I smiled because people expect that. Kara said that I should relax, that the catering company knew about Toby's allergy, that everything had been checked twice. She said it the way people speak to a nervous child. I kept my answer short. I said that I was glad they had told the cooks, and that it was better to ask one time too many than once too few. Food started to arrive, dish after dish. Roasted meat, vegetables covered in sauce, bread, things with names I did not know. Everything looked rich and heavy. I watched Toby's plate. His food seemed simple enough, and I tried to trust what they had said. Kara's phone was on a little stand at the end of the table, recording the whole evening. She said she wanted to make a holiday video. Roland called me old-fashioned when I looked at the phone and said that I must get used to it, that this was the modern way. The room grew hot from all the bodies, the candles, and the food. A dull pressure started behind my eyes. I am not used to loud rooms anymore. My small apartment is quiet, with only the sound of the fridge and the occasional car outside. Here, there was laughter, overlapping stories, clinking cutlery, high-pitched music from a speaker in the corner. I ate slowly, more to be polite than because I was hungry. After a while, my stomach turned a little, and the heat made my face feel flushed. I decided that a glass of water and a moment in the cooler kitchen would help. I excused myself, moving my chair back carefully so I would not bump anyone. No one paid much attention. Roland had begun another story. Kara was checking her phone to see how many people were watching the live video. Toby was picking at his food, more interested in the shiny decorations and the tiny plastic snowman near his plate. I put a hand on his shoulder as I passed and told him softly that I would be right back. He nodded without really looking at me, his eyes fixed on the snowman. The kitchen was a different world. The sound from the dining room became a muffled buzz. The overhead light was bright and white. Serving dishes, trays, and boxes were stacked on every counter. The smell of sugar was strong. On one side, I saw my cake box pushed aside, lid half open, as if someone had peeked in and then lost interest. In the middle of the room, on a long counter, stood a large tray of little desserts with glossy tops and neat decorations. I moved closer to the tray. There were small folded cards stuck into the edge. Some were standing up, some had tipped over. My habit from work kicked in. I read labels by instinct. I saw the word "contains nuts" printed clearly on one of the cards that had fallen flat. Another card said hazelnut, another almond cream. Under the tray, half tucked under a napkin, lay a small plate with a name card. I pulled it out. The card had Toby's name on it in gold ink, and the dessert on that plate looked just like the ones with the nut labels. For a moment I thought maybe it was a mistake, that the plate had been placed there only as an example. Then I heard a faint cough from the dining room. Another cough followed, sharper. My chest tightened. I moved back to the doorway and looked in. Toby was sitting upright but shifting in his chair. His hand went to his neck, scratching. His cheeks looked redder than before. Roland was leaning in, telling him to eat his treat for the camera. The dessert on Toby's plate was half gone. I did not feel panic. I felt something else, something very clean and clear. Years ago, as a volunteer paramedic, I had seen that look on faces, that uneasy scratching and sudden flush. I reached for the small bag I always carry and checked the familiar shape inside. Then I stepped into the dining room, walked straight to Toby's chair, and placed my hand gently on his back. His breathing sounded tight. When I asked him how he felt, he said that his throat felt strange and that it was hard to swallow. Kara started to say that he was probably just excited, that he always got restless at events. Roland tried to wave me away and said that everything was fine, that the dessert was safe, that I was making people nervous again. I did not argue. I had already seen the label in the kitchen. I told Lucas in a firm, low voice that Toby needed help right now. Toby's breathing was getting faster, and little sounds came with each breath. I took out the auto-injector from my bag, explained what I was about to do, and used it on Toby's thigh with steady hands. The room went very quiet, then broke into noise. Someone gasped. Someone said that I was overreacting. Someone else asked if they should call emergency services. I answered that I had already reached for my phone. I gave clear details, my voice calm, giving the address and describing the child's condition. Years of training made the words fall into place. I said how old Toby was, what had happened, what medicine I had just used. The person on the other end of the line said that a unit was on the way. Toby held onto my sleeve. His eyes looked scared, but his breathing slowly began to smooth out. Kara hovered near us, torn between him and the camera that was still pointed at the table. She finally turned it away and stopped the recording. Roland stood at the head of the table, his mouth tight, his grip white on his glass. He told everyone that it was under control and that people should stay seated. I kept my hand on Toby's back and listened for the distant sound of a siren. When the paramedic team arrived, I felt a strange mixture of relief and shame. Relief because help was there, shame because all eyes were on me as if I had caused the scene, not the tray in the kitchen. Carlos, the team leader, recognized my name. We had met on calls years before. He gave me a quick look that said he understood. He checked Toby, asked questions, and agreed with the use of the injector. Then he said they would take Toby in for observation, just to be safe. Kara looked at Lucas, then at her parents. She told Carlos that she did not know how things had gone so far, that maybe there had been confusion in the kitchen, that her father had spoken with the catering staff. Roland told him that I tended to react strongly, that I always expected the worst. Carlos did not comment. He focused on Toby, on the chart, on the basic checks. He asked who would ride in the ambulance. Kara said that she would go. I said that I would follow in my car. On the drive to the hospital, my hands shook a little on the steering wheel. Not from fear, but from anger that I forced down. The road was dark, the red lights of the ambulance shining ahead of me. I tried to focus on simple facts. Toby had received the medicine. He was in trained hands now. The rest would be watched closely. I repeated these things in my head like a quiet list. Facts are easier to carry than feelings. In the emergency waiting area, the bright lights made everyone look pale. I sat on a plastic chair near the vending machines. Kara went in with Toby. Lucas stayed with me for a while, then drifted off to talk with his in-laws when they arrived. I expected someone to say thank you, even in a stiff way. Instead, I heard soft complaints. Kara told her mother that the call had scared Toby and that the whole night was ruined. Elaine murmured that it was such a shame that things had been blown out of proportion. A doctor came out after some time and spoke with us. He said that Toby had reacted to something that clearly contained nuts, that the fast use of the injector had made a big difference. He spoke directly to me when he said that. I nodded. Kara quickly added that they had informed the catering company and that there must have been a mix-up, that no one meant any harm. The doctor answered that intentions did not change the effect on a child's airway. He suggested a follow-up in the allergy clinic. After he left, Roland pulled Lucas aside near the coffee machine. I stayed seated and looked at the floor, but their voices carried over the hum of the room. Roland said that this could have been handled more quietly, that I had turned a small scare into a scene with sirens and hospital forms. He said that Toby would remember the fear more than anything else. He told Lucas that I was getting old and nervous, that my presence brought stress, not comfort. Then Roland said something that settled deep in my chest like a stone. He told Lucas that they needed to talk, after the holidays, about limiting my time with Toby, especially alone time. He said it in a low, practical way, as if he was talking about changing a light fixture or repainting a room. Lucas did not answer right away. He just stood there, his shoulders tense, his hands around the paper cup. I sat on my plastic chair and understood, very clearly, that Christmas had just changed everything for me. The hospital kept Toby overnight for observation. After Roland spoke to Lucas by the coffee machine, I stayed in my chair and watched the vending machine lights blink. No one came over to ask how I was doing. No one sat beside me for long. Lucas moved between groups, talking in low voices with Kara and her parents. Every now and then he looked in my direction, then looked away again. Later, a nurse told us that only one parent could stay in the room. Kara said she would stay with Toby. She told Lucas that he should go home and rest so he could be fresh for the morning. Lucas hesitated and glanced at me. I told him that I would drive home, that I was fine, that he should stay near his son. He repeated that he would do what Kara wanted. I walked out to the car park alone. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. The streets were almost empty, with only a few lights and windows. The cake I had brought was still on the back seat, untouched in its box. I left it there when I parked. Inside my apartment, I took off my shoes and coat and sat down without turning on the television. My small living room felt even smaller after that big dining room. I sat there in the half-dark and listened to the fridge hum. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Toby scratching at his neck and heard that tight sound in his throat. I also heard Roland's calm voice near the coffee machine, already planning to cut me out. I reminded myself of the doctor's words, that the quick action had helped. I told myself, again and again, that I would always do the same thing if I had to. It was the only part of the night that felt right. In the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas. He wrote that Toby was stable and that the doctors wanted to keep him a bit longer, just to be careful. He thanked me for driving home and said he would update me after the follow-up appointment in the allergy clinic. There were no words about the injector. No mention of the call to emergency services. It was a short message, polite and flat. A few days later, I met them at the hospital for that follow-up. The clinic waiting room had soft chairs and pictures of smiling children on the walls. Toby sat on Kara's lap with a small toy car in his hands. He looked tired, but cheerful. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and he reached out his arms. Kara's smile tightened for a second before she moved him toward me. I held him gently and kissed the top of his head. The specialist called us in and asked us to sit. She had Toby's chart open on the screen. She spoke in a calm, clear voice. She said that his allergy was serious and that even a small amount of the wrong food could cause a strong reaction. She said that someone had given him a dessert that clearly contained nuts, even though the instructions on his file were plain. She asked how that had happened. I told her what I had seen in the kitchen, the tray, the labels, the name card under the napkin. I kept my words simple and steady. Kara shifted in her chair. She said that there must have been confusion, that the staff probably mixed up the plates, that it was a busy night. She said she had trusted the catering company and that no one meant for anything bad to happen. The doctor listened and wrote notes. The specialist then spoke about care plans, about always reading labels, about keeping emergency medicine close. She looked at me when she mentioned the injector and said that fast action is often the difference between a scare and something much worse. She asked that we make sure Toby always had the emergency pen near him. I nodded. Kara said that of course they would have it at home, and she added that she hoped things would feel less dramatic next time. On the way out, in the hall, Kara walked ahead with Toby. Lucas and I followed. I waited for a quiet moment, then told Lucas that it had been good to hear the specialist confirm what I'd done. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. He said that the whole scene at Christmas had been very intense, that Toby had been frightened, that everyone had been shaken. He added that Roland felt things could have been handled in a calmer way. I asked Lucas how he would have handled it if he had walked into the kitchen and seen what I saw. He did not answer that question. Instead, he said that Kara was upset about the whole holiday being overshadowed by the emergency, that her parents felt all their work had been ruined. He asked me, almost pleading, to understand their side as well. I did not trust myself to answer, so I kept my mouth shut and walked beside him in silence. Back at my apartment, I stood for a long time in front of the shelf where I keep framed photos. There was a picture of Lucas at about Toby's age, sitting in a cheap plastic chair in our old kitchen, his face messy with homemade cake. I remembered that day. My late wife had stayed late at her job that evening, and I had promised to make the cake myself. It had been crooked and uneven, but Lucas had said it tasted better than anything from a store. I had worked double shifts that month, but I still found time to make that cake and hang paper chains. I thought back to those years often. I remembered standing in cold mornings waiting for the bus to the building site, then coming home to fix broken cupboards and check homework. I remembered how Lucas would fall asleep on the old sofa with his school book still open on his chest. Those memories were like small stones in my pocket, heavy but steady. They reminded me of the time before Roland's voice-filled family gatherings. Kara's family came into our lives during the years when I was slowing down. Lucas met her at a work event. She was bright, driven, always ready with a new idea for photos or parties. The first time I met Roland and Elaine was at a simple dinner in a restaurant. Roland had spoken for most of the meal. He had explained his business, his view of the town, his thoughts on houses and investments. When he learned I had spent my life as a building inspector on public sites, he had smiled in a polite way and said that people like me kept people like him out of trouble. It sounded like praise, but it felt like a reminder of rank. At the wedding, I saw the balance shift. Roland paid for the venue and made sure everyone knew it. He picked the wine, the band, even the color of the napkins. My speech was supposed to come after his. When the schedule changed, my speech was shortened and moved between two musical numbers. Roland spoke about how he would support the new couple in every way, how they would never need to worry about housing or schooling. My speech, about late nights and simple meals and quiet pride, felt small beside his long list of promises and jokes. Later, at Toby's first birthday, I brought a simple wooden toy I had sanded and painted by hand. Roland arrived with a large box that held a battery-powered car. The children at the party, and even some of the adults, gathered around the noisy toy. Roland lifted Toby into the car, held his hands on the wheel, and told everyone that this was what a proper grandparent did. I stood in the background holding my small wrapped gift and waited for a turn that did not really come. Back in the present, a few days after the follow-up, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was the family group chat. It had a name that Kara had chosen. Something about our little team, with a picture of Toby smiling. There were messages from Kara and Elaine about setting boundaries and managing anxiety around Toby's health. The tone was polite on the surface, but each line had a little sting. Kara wrote that the Christmas incident had shown that too much focus on worst-case scenarios could be harmful. She said that constant warnings and what she called emergency energy might make Toby fearful. She suggested that from now on, major health decisions and crisis responses should be left to her, Lucas, and medical staff. Elaine agreed and added a note about wanting calm, happy memories for Toby instead of nights full of sirens. I scrolled through the messages slowly. Roland did not write much. His comments were short, praising Kara for staying calm and thanking Lucas for keeping the family together. There were small praise phrases about parents who could handle things. No one typed my name. I was referred to as certain people or extra stress. I took screenshots and saved them, more out of habit than with any plan in mind. Years of paperwork had taught me to keep records when stories started to shift. Later that evening, a private message came from Lucas. He said that he hoped I understood that the group chat was not meant to attack me. He explained that Kara needed to feel safe as a mother and that her parents were only trying to support her. He added that it might be better if I saw Toby mainly at larger family events, where there would be plenty of people around and less pressure on me. He said it could make things easier for everyone. I read that message again and again. The words were gentle, but the meaning was clear. They no longer trusted me to be alone with my own grandson, not after I had acted quickly to protect him. I sat back in my chair and felt something steady inside me harden. I did not shout. I did not send angry replies. That is not the way I am built. Instead, I studied each line as if it were part of a report. I looked at it the way I used to look at cracks in a wall, trying to see what they really meant. Another photo arrived in the family chat. It showed Toby in front of the Christmas tree weeks earlier, when he was still full of energy and color. He sat on Roland's lap while Roland held a wrapped box and smiled at the camera. The caption Kara had added said that this was the grandfather who had stepped up that year. I could see a blur of my own shoulder at the very edge of the photo, cut off by the frame. My hand held a small gift just outside the crop. I stared at that image for a long time. In a way, it made things simple. They had chosen their picture, they had chosen their story. In their version, I was the nervous older man who turned a holiday into a scene, and Roland was the strong figure who made everything better. There was no room in that story for what the doctor had said or what the allergist had written on the chart. I put the phone down and walked over to my small kitchen. I boiled water and made tea the way I always do, 1 spoon of loose leaves, a bit of honey. As the water poured into the mug, I realized that from that moment on, I could not lean on old memories to keep the peace. All the nights of homework and simple birthdays did not matter now in their eyes. They had started to write a new script for my place in this family, and if I did nothing, that script would soon become the only one anyone remembered. I carried the tea to the table and sat down. The room was quiet. Outside, in the dark street, I saw the outline of my neighbor Nora's balcony. A small light was on, and for a second I thought of going over, knocking on her door, and telling her everything. Instead, I sat and listened to my own breathing, slow and steady. Somewhere between the steam rising from the mug and the faint humming of the fridge, a simple thought formed in my mind. If they were going to turn this into a story about how I was unstable and in the way, then I needed to make sure the facts of the night did not get buried under their version. I did not know yet how I would do that, but I knew one thing clearly. I would not let this be just another moment where I swallowed my pride and tried to be grateful for crumbs of time with my grandson. A week after the follow-up appointment, Lucas called and asked if I could meet for dinner with him, Kara, and her parents. His voice sounded careful, as if he was reading lines already chosen. He said that Roland wanted to clear the air, that it would be good to talk things through in a calm place. I agreed. Part of me hoped it meant they had thought things over and understood what really happened that night. The restaurant Roland chose was the kind with soft lighting and polished wood. A host led me past tables with white tablecloths to a private room at the back. Roland and Elaine were already there, sitting side by side. Kara sat near them, and an empty chair waited near the end of the table. Lucas stood up when I came in and tried to smile, but his shoulders were tense. Roland greeted me with a firm handshake and a bright tone that did not reach his eyes. We ordered food, though I was not hungry. The small talk at the beginning felt forced. Roland spoke about a new project, about how well the holidays had gone except for what he called one difficult moment. Then he shifted the conversation to that night. He said that everyone had been very shaken, that sirens and hospital walls were not the memories they wanted for Toby. He said that my decision to act so quickly had created a lot of fear in the room. I listened without interrupting. When he paused, I reminded him of the dessert tray, the labels, the name card under the napkin, the way Toby had started to scratch at his neck. I repeated calmly what the specialist had said about fast action. Roland nodded as if he had heard a small point in a long meeting and then steered things back to what he wanted to say. He insisted that what mattered most was the emotional impact on the family, not the details of how it had happened. Kara then spoke up. She said that she felt controlled when I brought emergency medication to events, that it made her feel like I did not trust her as a mother. She said that the sight of me reaching for my bag had made her feel powerless in her own house. She insisted that she had told the catering company about Toby's allergy and that they had written it down, so she felt justified in believing everything would be safe. To her, my presence had turned a prepared, happy evening into something she described as a scene. Lucas added a few words, trying to soften things. He said that everyone wanted the same thing, which was for Toby to be safe and for the family to feel at peace. He said that maybe clear rules would help. When I asked what kind of rules, Roland pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the table as if it were nothing special. He said that, to avoid misunderstandings, they had asked a friend to draft a simple agreement. His tone stayed light, as if he was offering me a menu. He explained the contents in broad strokes. In his view, I should agree not to interfere with medical decisions for Toby, except in the most extreme circumstances. He said that I should also agree not to bring emergency medication to large events, since it created what he called a climate of fear. Then he moved on to the house. He mentioned that it would be helpful to sign something that confirmed it fully belonged to Lucas and Kara, that my earlier help had been symbolic and did not need to be reflected on paper anymore. I let him talk until he finished. He framed it as a way to reduce stress, to make future gatherings smoother, to show the outside world a united front. He spoke as if I were the one who had made things unstable and as if this paper would fix it. When he was done, he slid the folder toward me and said that I could look it over and sign, that it was all standard and nothing to worry about. Lucas watched me with a troubled expression, half hopeful, half ashamed. I did not open the folder. I rested my hand on it for a moment and felt the thin weight of it. Years of reading building contracts and safety reports had taught me that any document presented as harmless is worth reading very slowly, preferably at home, and preferably with someone who knows the law. I told them that I would not sign anything that night. I said that if there was a paper with my name on it, I would have my own person read it first. I kept my voice even, without any anger, just stating a fact. The air in the room changed. Roland's smile cooled. He said that this was only about harmony, and that refusing to sign sent a worrying signal. Kara's jaw tightened. She said that she was disappointed that I did not trust them. Lucas tried to say that maybe we could all slow down and talk again later. I stood up, thanked them for the meal, and said that I needed fresh air. On the way out, I left the folder on the table where it lay. A few days later, Lucas called and asked if I would drop by the house in the afternoon to see Toby. He said that it would be good for the boy to have some normal time with me out in the yard. I agreed, thinking that maybe the restaurant scene had shaken them too, and that they had realized the paper had gone too far. I drove over with a small toy truck and a bag and a scarf for Toby, since the weather had turned colder. When I arrived, Toby was already outside on the patio, bundled up, pushing a plastic car along the ground. He ran to me as soon as he saw my car, and I lifted him, careful and gentle. For a moment, the world was simple again, just his small weight in my arms and his laugh in my ear. Then the back door opened, and Kara and Roland stepped out, followed by Lucas. They arranged themselves like a little council. Kara began by saying that they had been thinking about the best way to keep everyone comfortable. She said that after talking it through, they felt it was better if I did not spend time alone with Toby for a while. She added that this was not punishment, but risk management. Roland spoke of how sensitive children are, how scenes like the one at Christmas could leave deep marks. He said that they wanted Toby to associate me with calm, not with emergencies. Lucas stood beside them, not quite behind, but not beside me either. He repeated the phrase about less pressure that he had used in his message. He suggested that I see Toby only at larger gatherings, with other people around, so that if anything happened, I would not feel the full weight of responsibility. The way he said it made it clear that in their minds, I had misused that responsibility once, and they were not ready to forgive it. I listened, holding the toy truck in my hand. Toby tugged at my sleeve, eager to show me something he had drawn with chalk on the ground. For his sake, I kept my face calm. I asked for clarity, and they confirmed that from now on, there would be no more afternoons where I would pick Toby up from nursery, no more short visits alone at the park, no more Saturday mornings baking in my small kitchen. Every moment would be supervised, controlled, counted. I stayed for an hour, playing with Toby in the yard while the three of them watched from the patio. I tried to enjoy the time, but it felt like someone had placed a pane of glass between me and my grandson. Every laugh he gave, every small hand reaching for mine, was watched and measured. When it was time to say goodbye, I knelt down, hugged him, and told him I would see him soon. I did not promise anything more than that. Promises had begun to feel fragile. Back in my apartment, I took off my coat and walked straight to the bedroom closet. At the back, on the floor, sat an old fireproof box, the kind you buy when you have very little but know that what you have matters. I dragged it out, carried it to the kitchen table, and set it down. The metal was cool under my fingers. I took a breath and opened it. Inside lay the pieces of my life that had once seemed routine but now felt important. There were old pay stubs from years on construction sites, a copy of the mortgage from the house Lucas grew up in, our marriage certificate, and a folder with papers I had not touched in a long time. On top of the folder sat an envelope with my late wife's handwriting. The ink had faded a little, but her loops and careful letters were still clear. I took out the envelope and opened it. Inside, there was a short note she had written when we met with a lawyer years earlier, after Lucas finished school. She had written that she wanted any help we gave to future grandchildren to be tied to the idea of families staying close. She had been afraid, even then, that money could pull people in strange directions. She wrote that if anyone forgot where they came from, the help should wait for hands that remembered. The folder under the note, thick with official paper, was the trust we had set up in those days when we had very little but still believed we could shape the future a bit. I did not read every line that night. I did not need to. I remembered the meetings with the lawyer, the explanations about conditions and control, about how, if things went wrong, the person who created the trust still had choices. At the time, it had felt like planning for storms that would never come. Now I realized we had, in a way, packed an umbrella long before the clouds formed. Deeper in the box lay another set of papers, this time about the new house Lucas and Kara had bought. When they had first told me they were looking, I had been proud to help. I had taken some of the savings from years of careful living and offered it to them for the down payment. At the bank, the advisor had suggested putting my name on part of the title, since I was providing part of the equity. Lucas had agreed at the time. We had all signed without much thought, more focused on paint colors and where Toby's room would be. I pulled out the copy of the title and the repayment agreement we had made between us. It was simple, written with the help of a clerk. Lucas and Kara would slowly buy out my share over time, or keep my name on the deeds until they did. Reading it now, after the restaurant meeting and the patio announcement, these papers felt very different. They were no longer just courtesy arrangements between family. They were, in a quiet way, levers I had forgotten I was holding. I laid everything out on the table, the note from my wife, the trust folder, the house papers. The table surface disappeared under rectangles of paper and faded stamps. As I looked at them, my phone buzzed. A small window slid down on the screen, showing a reminder I had not changed in years. Yearly review with lawyer Sonia, set for the same week every winter. For the past few years, I had gone out of habit, signing forms to keep things current and then going home, barely thinking about it. I stared at the reminder. The timing felt almost strange, but it was only the simple result of a date set long ago. I picked up the phone and opened my calendar. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later. Instead of thinking of it as another routine visit, I now saw it as something else. A chance to speak with someone who knew both the trust and the house papers. Someone who could tell me, in clear terms, what all this really meant. I did not feel excitement. I felt the same quiet clarity that had come over me in the kitchen when I saw the dessert tray. The situation was different, but the feeling was the same, the sense that this was a moment where I could either look away and hope for the best, or look straight at what was in front of me and act. I stacked the documents carefully, slipped them into a folder, and placed it by the front door. For the first time since Christmas, I went to bed with a plan forming, instead of just questions circling in my mind. 2 days later, I walked into Sonia's office with the folder under my arm. The building was the same as always, a plain structure near the center of town, with worn carpet in the hallway and the faint smell of old paper. Inside her office, everything was in order. Neat stacks of files, a plant by the window, certificates in simple frames on the wall. She greeted me with the steady warmth I had known since the days when my wife and I sat in those chairs to plan for a future we could not see. She asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth in simple pieces. I said that Christmas had gone bad, that Toby had eaten a dessert with nuts, that I had used the emergency pen and called for help. I said that some people had thanked me, but that later the story had started to turn. I described the way Kara and Roland spoke about the night, as if I had made it bigger than it was, as if the main problem was that the evening had been disrupted. I told her about the restaurant meeting and the folder I refused to sign. I told her about the new rule on the patio. Sonia listened without interrupting. She has one of those faces that seem quiet even when they change. I watched her eyes as I spoke. They sharpened when I mentioned the thin folder at the restaurant. They narrowed when I described the rule about never being alone with Toby. When I finished, she asked to see what I had brought. I slid the folder across the desk and opened it so both of us could see. First, she picked up the paper with my wife's handwriting. She smiled briefly at the note, as if she remembered my wife's cautious nature, then placed it aside with care. Then she opened the trust folder and skimmed the key pages, the ones she had helped draft years ago. She pointed to certain lines and read them aloud in her own words, not as legal phrases, but as plain statements. She reminded me that the trust was my creation, that I was still in control of how and when it moved. She pointed out the section that spoke about the relationship between the grantor and the family. It said that the trust existed to support grandchildren in a setting of respect and connection. If that connection broke in a clear, deliberate way, the person in charge of the trust had the right to change conditions, to pause distributions, or even to direct the funds in another way that still served the child's future. She said that these were not just polite lines. They were binding. Then she moved on to the house papers. She checked the copy of the property title and traced the names with her finger. Mine was there, just as I remembered, listed as holding a share of the home. She checked the repayment agreement and nodded. The terms were simple but firm. I was not just a donor. I was a partial owner until something new was signed. Any change to that would need my clear, recorded consent. She leaned back in her chair and looked at me. In a calm voice, she said that, in legal terms, I was far from powerless. I still had a stake in the house and control over a trust that would matter a great deal to anyone who cared about Toby's future. She also said that if someone was trying to push me out while using my help, that behavior was important. Courts and agencies cared about patterns, not just one moment. I told her about the family group chat, about the polite words that painted me as a source of fear, about the photo of Roland with Toby under the caption about the granddad who had stepped up. I described the messages about boundaries and how they never used my name, only soft phrases about certain people. I admitted that I had taken screenshots and kept them. Sonia nodded and said that saving those messages was the right instinct. She told me that in disputes about family behavior, written words carry more weight than stories told later. She asked if I had copies of any hospital records from the night of the incident. I said that I had only what I remembered and the doctor's verbal remarks. She suggested that I request formal copies, the emergency report, the notes from the follow-up, the list of what Toby had eaten. She said that those documents would not just sit in a file, they would be part of a full picture if anyone ever claimed that the night had been just a small scare or that my response had been wild and unnecessary. When I left her office, I did not have a plan yet, but I had a map. I knew what existed and where it was. I knew that my name was not just a detail on old paper. It was a key in more than one lock. The next day, I went to the county records office. It was on the second floor of an old building that once held a post office. Inside, there were metal shelves with files, a long counter, and a line of people holding numbered tickets. When my turn came, I asked the clerk for the current property record for Lucas and Kara's address. I gave the lot number and waited while she typed. She handed me a fresh printout. My name was still on it, in the same clean typeface as Lucas's and Kara's. The clerk mentioned, in passing, that any major change to the mortgage or any sale would need signatures from all listed owners. The words were simple, just part of her routine, but they settled in my mind. All owners. Not just the people who spoke the loudest at the dinner table. From there, I walked to the courthouse. I did not have an appointment. I simply went to the section where family and social matters are handled. There was a small window with glass and a woman behind it, sorting files. I told her, in broad terms, that I was a grandparent who had intervened during a medical incident, and that some people in the family now said I had overreacted. I said that I wanted to understand how to document what had really happened in case things became more difficult later. She did not give me advice because that was not her role, but she explained procedures. She said that if someone ever made a complaint about my behavior, people would look at records, hospital notes, ambulance logs, written care plans. She told me that if I wanted my view of events on file, I could write a clear statement and attach it to any future report, along with copies of those records. She also said that calm, detailed documents helped more than emotional letters. I thanked her and left. The courthouse lobby was busy with people moving in different directions, carrying folders and wearing expressions that told their own stories. My own steps felt slow and steady. I was not there to start a fight. I was there to learn which doors existed, even if I never had to open them. When I got home, I cleared my kitchen table and placed the fireproof box back in the center. One by one, I took the new papers and added them. The property printout from the county office, a note I had made about the courthouse conversation, the list of documents Sonia had suggested I request. Then I opened my laptop and signed into the hospital portal. I requested copies of Toby's emergency visit notes and the follow-up clinic report. In the comment box, I simply wrote that I was a close relative and present at the initial event. I also called the ambulance service and asked how to request a basic record of the call on Christmas. The person on the line explained the steps clearly. I wrote everything down. The next task was my phone. I sat at the table and scrolled through old messages. I created folders and moved screenshots into them. Messages from the night of the incident went into one folder. Comments about boundaries and my supposed nervous nature went into another. The cropped photo of Roland and Toby, with its bright caption, went into a third. I printed the most important ones and laid them out to dry on the table. As the pages lay there, I saw a pattern that had been harder to grasp through a glowing screen. The careful words formed a net. I was always described as anxious, intense, heavy, too much. Roland and Kara were always calm, steady, bold, taking charge. The story they were building was not about one night. It was about the kind of person each of us was supposed to be in the eyes of others. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was from a social media app I did not use much, but Kara used it often. A relative had tagged me in a post. When I opened it, I saw a short video from New Year's Eve at Lucas and Kara's house. Toby was dancing in the living room while Roland lifted him and counted down to midnight. The caption talked about starting the year with the family backbone and had a row of heart emojis. My name was not mentioned anywhere. In the comments, someone asked if I had been there. Kara replied that after the stressful Christmas incident, they had kept things small and calm with the people who brought peace. She wrote that certain older relatives meant well, but sometimes created drama with their fear. Roland replied agreeing, saying that the new year was for strong, stable energy. I saved those screenshots as well. I did not reply, not in public and not in private. Instead, I turned off the app and sat in the quiet. The more they spoke this way in front of others, the clearer the line became. They were not just setting boundaries, they were shaping a public view of me as someone whose presence harmed the child I had tried to protect. It was one thing to argue at a table. It was another to write that story into the record of the world. A few days passed. Then, on a gray afternoon, as I was making soup on the stove, my phone rang. Sonia's name showed on the screen. I wiped my hands, picked up, and listened. She said that some of the documents I had requested had already reached her office. She had read them and found that the hospital notes matched what I had told her. The emergency pen use was recorded, and the staff had written that it was timely and appropriate. She also said that she had reviewed the full trust details again and wanted me to understand their scale. It was larger than I liked to think about. Over the years, careful saving and modest interest had grown it into a sum that would matter a great deal to anyone planning a child's schooling and early adult life. In her calm voice, she reminded me that I could, within the rules, change conditions on that fund if the family treated me as someone to be pushed aside or hidden. She suggested that we meet again soon to talk about options. Her tone was not excited, only precise. She said that we did not need to act in anger, only in alignment with the values written into the trust from the start. As she was speaking, my phone vibrated with another notification. A new message sat at the top of the family group chat. Kara had sent out an invitation for a New Year family dinner at their house with a note about fresh starts and resetting energy. I told Sonia that I would come in for another meeting. After I ended the call, I opened the group chat. People were already replying with cheerful symbols and promises to attend. I looked at the date and time, then at the folders spread across my table. For the first time, when I thought about walking into that house, I did not feel like a guest asking for space. I felt like someone carrying a quiet ledger that, when opened, would show a very different picture of who had stepped up and who had not. My second meeting with Sonia felt different from the first. The first time, I had come with a folder and a story, not sure what any of it would amount to. The second time, I walked into her office knowing I had choices, and that knowledge sat on my shoulders like a steady weight. She greeted me the same as before, with a simple smile and a nod toward the chair. I sat, placed the folder on the desk, and waited. She did not rush me. After a moment, she asked in a gentle voice if anything new had happened with the family since we last spoke. I told her about the New Year video, about the caption that talked about people who brought peace while quietly cutting me out of the frame. I told her about the replies in the comments, about how Kara had written that, after the stressful Christmas incident, they wanted only calm people near Toby. I told her that I had not responded, that I had saved the screenshots instead. I mentioned the invitation to the New Year family dinner. Sonia nodded as I spoke, then turned to her computer. She pulled up some documents and printed a few pages. She slid them across to me. They were summaries, in plain language, of the trust and the options we had discussed on the phone. She spoke slowly, making sure I followed each point. She explained that I could leave everything as it was and hope the family's behavior changed on its own. She explained that I could freeze parts of the support, which would send a message but might not be clearly understood. Then she explained a third path. Adjust the structure so that the support still served Toby, but under stricter conditions, with an independent person managing it instead of leaving influence in the hands of people who saw me as a problem to be hidden. She made it clear that this was not about punishment. It was about alignment with the trust's original purpose. It had been written to help a child in a family that respected the person who created it. If that respect went missing, the trust allowed for changes. She read my wife's note again, the one about helping only where people remembered where they came from. She placed the note beside the printed options as if my wife was at the table giving her opinion. I sat with all of that for a time. Part of me wanted to look away, to say that money should stay where it was, that I would just swallow my pride. But another part of me, the part that had moved without hesitation in the kitchen when I saw the dessert, knew that looking away now would simply let a quieter kind of harm continue. This harm was not to Toby's body, but to his sense of truth, to the story he would hear about who had stood up for him and who had not. I told Sonia, in simple words, that I wanted the truth to show in the money, not just in my memories. I wanted support for Toby to stay, but I did not want Roland and Kara to stand in front of it like gatekeepers while they erased me from the picture. I said I was ready to change the structure so that their behavior had real limits. Sonia listened, then began to mark certain lines on the papers. She wrote notes in the margins, small and neat. She told me that we could move the trust into a new setup with a neutral manager. She said we could add conditions that did not mention names or feelings, but talked about training, safety, and contact. She reminded me that Toby could still be the one who benefited in the end. This was about removing power from the people who used my support while telling the world I was harmful. When we were done, she printed the final forms. The pages had that fresh smell of new paper. She showed me where to sign and initial. My name, in my own handwriting, went onto lines that would bend the path of the future in a quiet way. I did not feel clever or triumphant. I felt steady. Each stroke of the pen was like adding another brace to a structure that had begun to crack. After leaving Sonia's office, I went to the bank. The clerk at the desk recognized my name from the files. With Sonia's prepared instructions, the process went smoothly. We spoke in calm, neutral terms about moving funds to a different kind of account, about appointing an independent person to manage them, about adding new rules. The clerk stamped the papers and told me that the changes would take effect soon. It felt like closing one door and opening another, all within the same building. On my way back home, I stopped at a small shop to buy envelopes. It felt almost silly, knowing what I had just done, to stand there choosing between plain white ones and heavier cream-colored ones. In the end, I chose the heavier ones. They seemed less likely to tear. At home, I spread everything out on the kitchen table once again. This time, the papers fell into groups. Some belonged to the trust, some to the house, some to the medical history of that Christmas night. I wrote short, clear cover letters in my own words. No anger, no long speeches, just facts. In one letter, addressed to Lucas, I explained that I would no longer leave my share of the house as silent support. I set out the basic terms. They could arrange to buy my share at a fair price through Sonia's office, or we could discuss selling the house and dividing the result according to the records. I wrote that I would not sign anything without a full plan on paper. In another letter, addressed to Kara and Roland, I explained that the education support for Toby had been restructured. I did not list every condition. I simply wrote that the fund would be managed by a neutral person from now on, and that their ability to present themselves as controllers of that support was over. I added that the new rules placed weight on proven safety training and on consistent, respectful contact, but that these things would now be monitored by others, not by me. I included copies of some key hospital notes and the follow-up report, not as a threat, but as a reminder of what had really happened that night. I wanted the papers to speak in their own calm language if anyone tried to twist the story again. I prepared a third packet, addressed not to my family but to a file number that Sonia had given me, linked to possible future reports. Into that envelope I placed my own written account of the Christmas incident, along with copies of the hospital notes and the emergency call record once it arrived. I did not know if I would ever send it anywhere outside Sonia's office, but I wanted it ready. By the time I finished folding and sealing the envelopes, the winter light outside had faded. I stretched my back and walked to the window. Across the narrow street, Nora stood on her balcony, watering a pot of evergreen branches she kept even in the cold. She saw me and waved. On impulse, I grabbed my coat and went down. Nora opened her door before I knocked. She said she had seen my light on very late in recent nights and had wondered if things were all right. On the small table in her living room, there was a half-finished puzzle and 2 cups already set out, as if she had expected company. I sat and, for once, did not hide the truth. I told her, in a steady voice, about Christmas, about the dessert, about the injector, about the way my quick action had turned into a story about me being unstable. I told her about the restaurant meeting, the paper I refused to sign, the new rule that kept me from being alone with Toby. I told her about the trust, the house, the new papers I had just signed. Nora listened the way some people listen to music, without interrupting, just letting the words flow. When I finished, she did not rush to tell me what to do. She simply said that some people only respect what they can measure, and that in this world, paper is one of the things they measure. She told me that using the tools I had was not revenge, it was self-respect. She also reminded me of something simple. Toby would grow. Children notice more than adults think. One day, she said, he would ask his own questions and read his own papers. On that day, it would matter that there was a quiet record of what I had done, even if no one was ready to see it now. When I left her apartment, the air felt colder, but my steps felt surer. At home, I placed the sealed envelopes into a small satchel and set it by the door with my coat. I checked the invitation again on my phone. The New Year family dinner was 2 days away. Those 2 days passed slowly. I went through small routines, tidying the apartment, buying groceries, walking around the block. Each time my mind drifted toward the coming dinner, I pulled it back and focused on the next simple task. I did not rehearse speeches. I did not plan scenes. My only plan was to show up, listen, and let the paper speak if needed. On the evening of the dinner, I dressed with care. Not in anything new or flashy, just in a clean shirt, a dark sweater, and the same polished shoes I had worn at Christmas. I put on my coat, lifted the satchel, and felt the firm shape of the envelopes inside. They were not heavy, but they had a presence. As I drove to Lucas and Kara's house, I noticed details I had missed before. The way the houses on their street seemed to lean in toward each other. The neat lines of hedges, the lights strung in straight, careful rows. When I parked, I saw more cars than usual in the driveway and along the curb. Some I recognized as family members' cars. One, a dark sedan with a sleek logo, I recognized as belonging to Roland's financial advisor, whom I had seen once at a distant event. I walked up the path with the satchel over my shoulder. Through the front window, I could see people moving about, glasses in their hands, holiday decorations still up, even though the day itself had passed. Kara opened the door before I rang, just like before. Her smile was smooth and practiced. She said how good it was that I came, that this night was about fresh starts. She glanced briefly at the satchel, then stepped aside. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of food and scented candles. People chatted in small groups. Toby, in a little sweater, ran around with a toy airplane in his hand. He saw me and ran over, hugging my legs. I bent down, hugged him back, and held him for a second longer than usual. Then I straightened and looked toward the dining room. The table was set again, though this time with fewer candles and more glasses. At the far end of the room, near the head of the table, Roland stood with a glass in his hand, talking to a man in a dark suit who must have been the advisor. Lucas hovered nearby, nodding along. On the sideboard, Kara had set up her phone again on a stand, ready to record. People began to move toward the table, taking their seats. I chose the same corner as last time, near the kitchen door. It felt right somehow to be in that same place with a different kind of weight in my pocket. I slid the satchel under my chair but kept one hand resting on it. When everyone had plates and glasses in front of them, Roland lifted his glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon. The faint ringing sound cut through the conversation. Voices fell quiet. Heads turned toward him. He smiled, broad and confident, and announced that before they ate, he wanted to say a few words about family, about foundations, and about who had stepped up for the next generation this year. As he spoke, I felt the firm edges of the envelopes through the fabric of the satchel under my hand, and I knew, with calm certainty, that I was ready for whatever story he was about to tell. Roland talked about being the backbone of the family. He said that real support meant offering a strong home and a solid future for Toby. People nodded. Kara watched him with shining eyes. I let him finish. Then I stood up and said I would like to speak too. No one stopped me, but the room went tight and quiet. I said what happened at Christmas in simple steps: the tray, the label, Toby's face, the injector, the ambulance. I said the hospital notes now showed that quick action had helped him. I did not raise my voice. Then I took the first envelope from my satchel and placed it in front of Lucas. I told him it held a notice about the house. I would no longer leave my share as silent support. He could arrange to buy me out through Sonia, or we could discuss a sale. All owners had a say. I put the second envelope in front of Kara and Roland. Inside were the new trust instructions. The fund for Toby was safe, but under a neutral manager now. Their control and image around it were finished. I added that my written account, with hospital notes and call records, was ready if anyone ever tried to paint me as a danger again. No one spoke. I took my key to their house from my pocket, set it beside the envelopes, turned, and walked to the door. The last thing I heard was the small sound of the latch closing behind me.